Okay guys, welcome to our biblical parenting class. Today we're going to talk about chapter 9, Principles of Obedience. And it is very awkward talking to a camera lens, so just bear with us as we do this, since we don't get to see your smiley faces today. We're not going to get into chapter 10 today because there is a lot of material in chapter 9, but we are excited about this because this is the first opportunity to get very practical with your children. So we're going to talk through all of this, make it as practical for you as we can. The Dela Cruz family put together some videos, which I think you'll really enjoy. We sure enjoyed watching them. And so let's dive in today. The first thing is, despite what may be happening with our jobs, despite what may be happening with the country right now, the one positive is that we're all getting a lot more time with our families. Yep. And so this is a perfect opportunity to implement this lesson. So like I said, we'll talk about biblical obedience and how to do that today. And so let's dive in. Number 1, Ephesians 6, 1 through 4 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth." So clearly the scriptures, not only here but elsewhere, they expect obedience from our children. And the truth is that if we teach our children to obey us, then we are also teaching them how to be obedient to God.
Yep.
And that's, of course, the transfer that we want to make happen. The world doesn't value obedience, but God promises us that it's good. It's easy to let culture, family, friends set the standard for obedience instead of God's Word. We've talked a lot about this in class, so we just want to highlight it again here. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to highlight is Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not conform to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." So God's way is best, and we have got to trust it. And so we're going to use Scripture today to try to highlight exactly what that should look like in our house. So let's start with, what is biblical obedience? Also known as first-time obedience. You may hear it referred to as FTO. And we'll talk about why, but let's first talk about the goals. The ultimate goal is for our children to learn to surrender, trust, and obey God in their life, because God promises that life will be better than without Him. Genesis chapter 22, 15 through 18 discuss Abraham's heart, his obedience when it came to the sacrifice of his child. And Luke 22:39 is, again, we see Jesus in the garden surrendering himself to God. Yep. And I know we're all dealing with that right now with our own level of obedience as we figure out what's going to happen with our employment and our country and people who are going to fall ill to this virus. Number 2, preciousness of others. When we don't obey God, our parents and or other authority figures, such as police officers, we hurt other people. Our bad decisions rarely only affect our life, and we want our children to be motivated to always consider the impact their decisions have on others. Third, another reason for biblical obedience is that it's vital for safety reasons.
Yeah. For example, because somebody taught us this, we taught it to Emily when she was starting to walk. We taught her to stop or to come to us, to follow basic commands. And one day we were at the park and she started to run to the street, and I yelled out, "Stop!" And she just froze right on the edge, and then a car went right by. And I was so grateful to God that He had taught me that it was important that she obeys immediately and completely, because had she not, she probably would have seriously been injured or not with us today. So it is important, not only for our own pleasure and comfort around our homes, that our kids obey, but more importantly for them in their relationship with God and ultimately safety.
Yeah, and then it takes an additional step here where our children's level of obedience is largely going to dictate what their conversion process is like. Mm-hmm. It will largely determine whether they're going to have a conversion that more resembles Jesus's or a conversion that more resembles the prodigal son. So getting obedience in the heart of your child is an essential step.
Yep.
Obedience protects us from our emotions. Our kids do not have to go this route if they learn the wisdom behind trusting God and the people He puts in their life. It will help them to capture their thoughts and make them their slaves and not be like reeds blown by the wind. Obedience also protects us from what we don't yet understand. Isaiah 55:9 says, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." A week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, we discussed Jesus' words when He says, "If you're really my disciples, then you'll know the truth, and then the truth will set you free." It's that same concept, right? That obedience opens the door for us to discovering the truth and opens the door to ultimate freedom. So we're going to skip a few things in these notes because we want to highlight the most important things, but we really want to encourage you to go and look through the textual notes online because there are things that we're not going to cover here that are also important.
Yeah.
Okay, so before you can train other character traits, you must first develop the habit of first-time obedience. And we're going to talk about exactly what do we mean by first-time obedience in a second. Training the heart of a child is to develop character. Obedience is the first and most necessary character quality your child needs to learn in order for them to be willing to learn from you in other areas of their life. And it's up to you, the parent, to teach them. So, what doesn't work? Well, the Ezzos talked about this in their video, and if you haven't watched Chapter 9 or read Chapter 9, pause this and go do that, because we're not going to cover the things that Gary so masterfully covered in his Principles of Obedience lesson. But here's, in short, what doesn't work. Counting to 3 to get obedience, or threatening and repeating, that doesn't work. Bribing your child does not work. In fact, the Bible warns against it in Ecclesiastes 7:7. Extortion, or obtaining something by threats, turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, absolutely.
If you bribe, for example, we're going to the grocery store, and if you behave well, I'll give you a piece of candy. Your child will do what's right because they're going to get something in return. They'll never learn the beauty of trusting the authority figure God put in their life. They'll never trust God unless it benefits them in some way. And obedience doesn't always immediately benefit us. And so we don't want to start that terrible cycle. Also, when you don't bribe, you really get to see what's in your kid's heart. So if my kids go to the grocery store and they don't obey me the first time, then I know that there's something in their heart that's leading them to making that decision. So we can go home, not train at the grocery store, but we go home and we can work on it. So conflict is good. And we need to see what's in our kids' heart, and we don't want to mask it by trying to control behaviors with prizes and treats. And we'll talk more in Chapter 10 about rewards, because there is a place for them, but not when it comes to character.
Okay, so what does biblical obedience look like? In 1 Samuel 3, 1 through 10, it says the following. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." But Eli said, "I did not call you. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again, the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call you. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." This is a beautiful insight into biblical obedience. Because what we see here is Eli, who's acting as Samuel's parent, that is able to identify that it's God speaking and not him, and he's able to turn Samuel to the Lord's voice. But none of that would have ever happened if it hadn't have been for Samuel's obedience.
Yeah.
If we want for our children to, at the age of accountability or thereabout, be able to be turned to God's voice, then we have got to have them attuned to our voice when they're young. So look at the heart of attentiveness and immediate obedience of Samuel. Look at how well trained he was to respond to authority. Then take notice of how the boy in return responded to God. He had an obedient heart to Eli, his authority, and then to God as well.
Yeah.
Now, if that had been me, I would have been frustrated by the third time. But we don't see that here with Samuel. We just see a trained heart of obedience.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty. We can call our children to the exact same obedience principle as modeled by Samuel. Samuel grew up and became the first major prophet in the land of Israel. He was known as the judge sent by God to save Israel. God was able to raise him up to lead the fight against the Philistines, and his leadership and wisdom led his people to peace. I believe it all started with Samuel's respect for authority and his complete obedience.
Yeah.
This is God's beautiful example for our children to imitate.
Yep. Okay.
So we're going to move on to how we taught first-time obedience in our house. So the standard, we'll talk about the standard here in a minute, and that is biblical, right? We've talked about this in our class, that there are biblical mandates that we need to achieve in our homes, and then there are tools to achieve them. So we're going to try to differentiate for you the biblical mandates versus the tools here in just a moment.
Let me go on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so now we're going to actually start getting practical on how do you do this. The first thing is, and I will always probably share this, is that you have to pray. I was told that, and I didn't do it. Probably for years. I kept trying to implement things at home and train the kids because I was excited to have a way to train them, but I didn't take the time to rely on God. And what would happen is I would be inconsistent. Or Dave would not be, when he would get home from trips, maybe he wouldn't be training them or holding them to the standard. We were really all over the place. And what has helped us to change as a family and be consistent has been our prayer life. Mm-hmm. That's more, it's not more important than training, but it is the first thing and the thing that you need to always be doing. Especially when you go through certain challenges. We're all going through a challenge now and it's stressful, but a lot of things are going to happen in our lives and we just need God's wisdom and we need his help to be disciplined to do this. This job of being a parent is the hardest, and so we need his help. Number 2 is you have to plan it.
Yep.
Teaching first-time obedience is not something you can do in the moment when you want them to do what you want them to do. You actually have to be proactive. You need to put it into your schedule and say, at 8 o'clock every morning after we've had breakfast, we're all going to take 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the age of your child, and we're going to practice what first-time obedience looks like. And we practiced it until our kids were characterized by it. And depending on, again, the age of your child, it will take a lot longer in the beginning. But if you do it every day for a little amount of time, I promise you it will become a habit. It's no different than teaching your children how to brush their teeth. I assume you've all been successful with that. If your child's a certain age, maybe 3 and up, they can brush their teeth on their own. You're probably not doing it when they're 10. So you can do the same thing with first-time obedience, the behavior side of it. So that's what we're going to get into next.
Excellent. So, training your children. Let's start with age 12 months to 2 years.
Okay.
First thing you want to accomplish is to train them to come to their name.
Yep.
This might take a year or so if the child is under 2. So it's going to take time, but it's okay because at that age you have very little of your training. So let's get this one right. When you call their name, go to them and say, "Come to mommy," or "Come to daddy." Walk them to where you were standing and put their hand on your leg, showing them what you expect them to do. And once they start coming to you at about 18 months, then tell them to say or sign, "Yes, mommy." And when they run the other way, when you call them, give them a verbal reminder, no, come to mommy, and walk them back to where you called them. Don't play that game. There's times to play catch your child. This isn't one of them when you're training. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's confusing to our children when we chase after them and we say, come to me, come to mommy, come to daddy. It's confusing when you play that game with them, but then in other situations you expect them to actually come to you. So we would use other terms. We'd say things like, I'm going to get you, or I'm going to chase you. But I would never say to my child, come to me when I was playing, if I didn't expect them to actually come to me. Okay, so that's important. I also wanted to add that this is all written down, so if you're trying to take notes real quickly, you don't have to. This will be posted on the website, exactly how we trained. Also, we're going to share a video where Jennifer Dela Cruz is going to show how she was teaching her Abigail, who has Down syndrome. So yes, you can teach children with special needs. Isn't that beautiful and amazing? Again, it might look a little different, might take a little longer, and that's where wisdom, prayer, and lots of getting advice and wisdom comes in. But the truth is, we can all be held to the standard to whatever degree God has made us capable. So I want to go on. Well, actually, if you read our notes, you're going to see what to do if your child isn't coming to you when they're a toddler. So you don't need to give them physical discipline at this time. You want to just make it clear that they need to do exactly what you expect of them, or they might go sit in their playpen for a while. So I'm not going to get into all those details because you can read them on your own. So another thing, once you teach a child to come to their name, the second area that you can train them, and you can start this one at 6 months old, so we should have probably listed this one first. But it's called blanket time. And the benefit of blanket time is that you can put your child on the blanket and your child knows not to get off the blanket. So one, they're safe. And if you're, at church and you're in the service, you can set a blanket on the floor. They can sit there and play quietly, or you can choose to train them to sit on your lap, whichever you prefer. But the nice thing about it is they actually learn that these are their boundaries without actually putting a physical boundary up. You don't have to get a playpen out every time you want to control your child. You can just train them to sit on a blanket. We will be posting a document specifically to train that. But the reason that one is beneficial when they're young is it does start teaching self-control and start teaching them to obey you. And Jennifer made a video for us with Abigail, and again, she did phenomenal on this video, and I think Jennifer said this was the best she'd ever done. So she's still in the training phase. So I can't tell you how long it will take for each of your kids, but it's important that you just stay consistent, again, a little bit every day. And with blanket time, you can even do it a couple times a day. You can do a little bit in the morning and a little in the afternoon. And again, the beauty of it is once they stay where they're supposed to stay, you can make dinner and be cooking for 30 plus minutes, and the child is playing content and quietly on a blanket. And they're safe, they're not running around the house, and you're not having to control them by putting them in a playpen all the time or sticking them in their crib. So it really is a beautiful thing to give them. The second area, probably the third area to train would be self-control sit time. So the first one I'd say blanket time, the second one could be coming to their name, and the third would be self-control sit time. That is a beautiful and amazing gift to give your kids. And there's actually a way to train it. And we're going to give you that document on the website as well. And when we did it, we have a cute photo. It's of Alex and Rachel when they were doing self-control sit time. I went out and I bought them each their own timer, and you have to give them their own timer. Well, you don't have to, but we did, because sometimes the child chooses not to have self-control and you have to start that child's time over. And that's more when the kids are really young. And by the way, we didn't start this till 18 months to 2 years. And I also gave them, my kids sat on a little mat. You don't have to do a mat. You can do a chair. It doesn't matter. But I defined for them exactly what I expected of them and how to get self-control. And of course, I spoke a lot of beauty into it of why this is so important. I was very happy and excited every time we were starting self-control sit time training. I was very happy, even if I didn't feel it. I came across very excited, and then they get excited, like, wow, this is amazing, Mom. I don't know what I'm doing, but they'll get excited too. And what I did is I would start with 1 minute. And the reason you want to start small is you want them to have success. So for 1 minute, my children would sit with their legs folded or hanging off the chair, and they'd have their hands folded. And once 1 minute went by, the timer would go off, and then we'd celebrate. We'd say, great job. I'd really praise them about how amazing their self-control was. And then I had a chart, and they'd go put a sticker up for day 1, and the goal was to get to 30 days. And so we did. The next day was 2 minutes, and the third day was 3 minutes, and we got all the way to 30 minutes to where my kids could sit with their hands folded and do absolutely nothing and have self-control. And so again, the beauty of that is once we went to a doctor's office or we went to church, I could tell them, okay, it's self-control sit time now. And they knew exactly what I expected of them. I never had to punish anymore out in public because we had done the training at home. And it just made our life so much more peaceful. And then you're going to use this tool of self-control sit time. You're going to use it in other areas when you're training them. So when they start to get really excited and they're losing self-control, all you simply say is, you need to get self-control. Mm-hmm. And they know exactly what that means. They'll fold their hands, they can take a deep breath, and they learn to control their body because you have taught them how to control themselves. Now, if you have an older child, I still encourage you to start self-control sit time, because we actually started a little later, except for Rachel. We started her about 18 to 2 years old. But the older ones, I waited because I just didn't really want to do it. Because it does take discipline to do it, but I can't tell you how amazing it was. What convinced me to finally train them is I was getting upset with them all the time. We'd be at the grocery store, be at the doctor's office, and I felt like yelling at them, or stop doing this, stop touching that. You need to be quiet. The doctor's talking, be quiet. And I was always upset, and I thought I need to train them. So I did train the other two a little older. And it didn't matter. It worked fine. And I know families that started training their kids at 10 years old. It doesn't matter. It's kind of, as the older your kid, you can look at it more as meditation, right? When you do meditation, you're not watching TV or playing a game. You're learning to be still and get your thoughts and get your body under control. So it works for adults too. So that's kind of ages 12 to 2, but I do want to make sure that you teach self-control sit time even to older kids. And then the last thing, we have a video for this too, is you can practice other commands for 12 months to 2 years. Things like stop, come, jump. Not that you're going to ask your kids to jump in an emergency, but you can make it a lot of fun. And so the point of it is you're teaching them to obey and do what you say exactly. And so you'll get to see the Dela Cruz kids practicing that. And they sure had fun. She told me they didn't want to stop recording.
Okay, so here's Jennifer's videos, and then we'll come back and start with ages 3 and up.
All right. So I'm working on blanket time with the almost 2-year-old. I do only about 5 minutes now. I hide the timer from her because last time when I had it up here, she was too interested in the timer. She doesn't need to see how much time she has. She's too little. Normally I start younger with blanket time, but with Down syndrome, she just was not ready last time I tried it. So we've only just begun doing this again, maybe in the last month, and not even as consistently as I like. But again, we're only at 5 minutes, and so even though she doesn't see the timer, I want to associate, I want her to associate the ding of the timer with blanket time being done. So if she crawls off, I just put her back on right now and tell her no. I'll point to the blanket and she points. So most of the time she knows that she's supposed to stay on. But if her sister is doing blanket time next to her, that's too much temptation. So I can't do that right now. She'll crawl off of her blanket and get on her sister's blanket. So we have to do it with just her right now. And can't do more than 5 minutes or she's just done. But I guess that's really about it as far as training her. I don't give her little swats yet because we're still in the training phase. As it goes a little bit longer, or if we do it a little bit more, I may start giving her little swats as she crawls off. just so that she has a better understanding. All done. Blanket time's all done. Can you clean up? The other thing that I do for self-control sit time is have the 4 and 6 year old practice just sitting quietly, folding their hands. We have, I put the youngest in the pack and play for this time just so she can be occupied. And then they sit here. We have a visual timer so they can see. We do about 12 minutes. Right now, and every so often we raise it by a minute so they get used to sitting there longer. And I just stay nearby so that I can monitor and make sure they are obeying and sitting quietly. And again, this comes in handy, bless you, if we have to go to a doctor's office or we go somewhere where we forgot to bring a book or something to look at. They know how to sit and have self-control. Okay, so one of the ways that I teach my younger kids self-control, especially as babies, is how to sit on my lap. And a lot of times babies will do the bucking when they want to get down, but she needs to learn to have self-control to sit on my lap at church or any time that I need her to sit. So we do that when we have Bible time in the morning. So when breakfast is done, first she sits in her high chair for a while, and then when breakfast is done, she'll sit on my lap while we read a Bible story. And I work a little bit with her folding her hands, but she still puts her thumb in her mouth a lot, and that's fine. But if she makes a lot of noise, I tell her shush, and I'll take her hand and tell her shh, have her be quiet. And if she does the bucking thing and tries to get down, then I'll just give her a light pinch on her leg. But I'm just telling her to just be quiet. Now, it's not always pretty, and the Bible stories aren't always short, so there are interruptions, but it's, a little bit every day helps her to learn what she needs to learn. Stop the work. As you remember, the 10 tribes of Israel were taken into captivity by the king of Assyria. Foreign nations were then brought into Samaria. These foreigners lived in Samaria all 70 years while the Jews were in captivity in Babylon. Now they saw that some of the Jews had as they built Jerusalem. There was nothing for the trees to do until they had told them to stop the work. The trees are not lived untrue.
Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the videos. So here we are back talking about training ages 3 and up. So first, if your child is over 3 years old, we should explain to our children the change that we're going to make to how we obey. If needed, tell them what you were doing was not right or fair to them previously. Certainly not best. Accept responsibility, apologize to them, and tell them the new plan of obedience you're implementing in your home. Adjust the moral teaching to the age of your child as well, and shorter is always better. So, number 1, teach the moral reason why we must obey all authority. So for ages 3 to 4, you're going to start teaching the moral reasons why they should obey. However, don't expect them to fully understand that until they're about 5 years old or older. Explain how adults must obey authority figures in our own lives. Romans 13:1 and 2 is a great scripture to use with your children. It says, "Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves."
Yeah.
Explain to your children what God expects and that it will go well with them in life if they are obedient. Ask your child what God's promise is if they trust and obey Him. Why would obeying the Bible and obeying godly parents bless your life? Those are questions you can ask your children.
And I think the more that you have empathy with your kid and relate to them about obeying, the more you guys will really work as a team, and they'll trust you, and they'll realize that you as the parent are also under authority. All of us are. So it's not just, we're not asking them to do something that we don't ask of ourselves.
Excellent.
Okay.
And then explain to them what first-time obedience looks like. Now, earlier in this lesson, we read through 1 Samuel 3, 1 through 10, but you'll want to do that with these children as well, and discuss how Samuel obeyed. And these things are important. 1, it was immediate. Samuel came immediately when he heard his name. He stopped whatever he was doing and went. 2, completely. Samuel came completely to Eli when he was called. And later in 1 Samuel, we see that he obeyed God completely when called. 3, he came without challenge. Samuel didn't question Eli. Why are you calling me in the middle of the night? He didn't try to negotiate. I'll be there in the morning. He just came without challenge. And consider this. When a child is saying either verbally or non-verbally that he doesn't think you have the right to ask him to come or obey, that's a challenge to your authority. That's the role God put you in.
Yeah.
And then lastly, without complaint. Samuel did not complain that it was the middle of the night. Ask your kids, how did Samuel obey? Did he argue with Eli? Did he trust Eli? Did he yell from his bed, "What do you want, Eli?" And then ask, isn't Samuel's obedience beautiful?
Yep.
And why is it beautiful? That's because it came from a heart that trusted the authority that God had put in Samuel's life, and it produced a peaceful and loving response from Samuel. God's ways, always more beautiful. Ask your child how they would like their little siblings or kids they babysit in the future to obey them.
Yep.
You're going to continue to teach these verses to your children for years. Revisit them often in the beginning until you have this first-time obedience habit, and occasionally as a reminder.
Yeah. I think the more questions you ask, the better, so that you're including your kid in the discussion and you're not just lecturing. And that can go for even as young as 3, 4, 5 years old. You just ask them questions at their level. And obviously, the older they are, the more questions you'll be asking. I also think you can role play bad ways of obeying and ask the kids how they feel and what they think. And I know I've shared already in this class a few examples, but the one time Emily wasn't obeying me very well, I asked her to be my teacher and pretend to teach me something. So she got up very excited and started to try to teach Alex and I something, and I was rude and disrespectful, and I looked away and I didn't pay attention. She got so angry, and once she calmed down, I said, "Please tell me, how did that make you feel when I did that?" And she did. And I said, "Now you understand why it's so important that when I'm speaking to you, you obey me a different way than what you have been doing." So you can role play. I think the more interactive, the better.
So after you've laid this foundation of the why, then we're going to get into the practical. And these are the 3 steps you want. Number 1, get their attention. Number 2, giving instructions and making sure they're received. And then number 3, them acting on your instructions.
Okay.
Okay?
Want me to go?
Yeah.
So for step 1, that is when you're going to call the child by their name. And all you're going to say is their name. For example, Emily. And you're not going to say anything else. And you're going to teach your child that when you call their name, they're to come all the way to you. And when they're younger, you may even ask them to touch your leg, because that teaches them exactly what's the right length from you to be. As if they're older, they don't have to touch you unless they're really having a hard time with coming close to you. But as you can see, just the step 1 of calling their name, we were very practical with our kids because we did not want to confuse them of the standard and expectation. We wanted them to clearly understand. And we called this call waiting. We just would call their name and we would wait until they came to us the appropriate way. Okay. If they are younger, you can have them say, oh, and by the way, when you call their name, all you should hear from them is, yes, mom, or yes, mom, I'm coming. Okay, and we have some exceptions to that when there's an emergency or they're busy doing something, but we'll get into that later. Okay. I just want to remind you that you're training them how they'll teach, how they will come to all authority figures in their future. How do you want them to address their teacher or maybe a coach or later their boss, right? If your boss called you to his office, I doubt you would sit at your desk and yell at them. I bet you would get up and you would go to your boss and you would say, however you address him, you would call him yes, sir, or maybe you'd say yes. And that's what we want to teach our kids. So the first step is you call your child's name and your child responds with, yes, mom, I'm coming, or yes, mom, and they come all the way to you.
Okay, and before we get on to step 2, I just want to highlight that many people think that calling their name and getting an appropriate response is less important. But we can assure you that once we got our kids to stop what they were doing and consider our call more important than what they were doing, submission, their hearts were ready to receive our instructions. If you lower your standard and don't require a yes, mom, with a good attitude, then you will notice pride begins to creep into your child's heart and they'll start lowering the standard on every other step of obedience. So it starts with step 1.
Thank you. Okay, so one thing that we want to suggest, and I think Gary discussed it in his video, is the 5-minute warning. So if I know that dinner's going to be ready in 5 minutes, I want to get my kids emotionally ready for me to call them. So I might go to their room and say, because they're by the way, they're maybe doing school or they're busy playing a game and they're emotionally really caught up in the activity. Well, out of respect for them, I would go to them and say, kids, and then I would wait until they stopped what they were doing and at least looked at me. By the way, if I come in the room and they're, close to me, like they're sitting on the ground and maybe I'm standing, they don't have to get up and come and touch me because I'm in the room and I'm coming to them. So I would just expect my kids to make eye contact with me, though, anytime I called their name. And I still would not attach any instruction. All I would do is say their name. Anyway, they'd make eye contact and I would say to them, in 5 minutes, I'm going to be calling your name from the kitchen because dinner will be ready. And that just helps them be prepared that I'm going to be calling them soon. It's kind of setting them up for success. Same thing, if they're outside playing, do your best to try to give them a warning that they have 5 minutes left. Okay, because that just helps. And when Dave and I do it to each other as well. If I'm making dinner and I know Dave's busy, I'll go in the room and I'll give him a warning that we're about to eat in 5 minutes. Obviously, I don't call him in and expect him to say, run to me and say, yes, Tammy.
And the last thing that we want to highlight in this, before we move on to step 2, is that this is just human interaction and courtesy, right? So if you're going to expect when you call your child's name that they come to you, if they're young, put their hand on you and say, yes, Dad, or yes, Mom, then you need to be courteous about when you exercise that authority. If you don't really need your kids to come to you and you know that they're doing something in the other room, then treat them the way you would treat any of your friends. You would go to that room and say, hey, can I speak with you for a second? Or, hey, I wanted to let you know the following. But you wouldn't expect your friend to get up and come to you so you could tell them something that had very little value. So it's a give and take relationship where we're building trust. If we're going to expect them to obey us wholeheartedly, completely, without complaint, with a good attitude, then we got to make sure that when we call them, we're calling them to something important.
Yep. Number
Step
2,
2.
yeah. So step 2 is after you've called your child and they've come to you and said, yes, Mom, then and only then do you start giving them instructions when they've given you eye contact. It's really important that we don't try to talk to our kids when they're looking around or they're jumping around or that they're running all around. One, they're probably not going to hear us, and then they're going to get in trouble later because they didn't follow our instructions. And 2, we're going to get angry and frustrated with them. So I would never speak to my kids. And by the way, this is as much training on us as it is on them, because we have to stop talking. We have to stop and we have to wait until they give us eye contact. And so I would call my kids. They'd say, yes, Mom. They would be within the appropriate distance that we had trained, and then I would wait until they gave me eye contact. When they were in the training phase of this, before they really, it was a habit for them, might take their face and I might, hold their chin and have them look at me and say, make eye contact. I won't talk to you until you make eye contact. And sometimes I would just stand there and wait. But when we're role playing and we're teaching this to them, it's really important that you help them understand that you are not going to give any instruction until they have self-control. They're not jumping around, but that they are making eye contact with you. And it's important that they make eye contact the entire time you're talking to them. So that takes a lot of training and correction, because they might make eye contact real quick, but then they want to go think about something else and mentally wander around with their eyes, and you don't want to allow that. So you don't give instructions, you don't talk to them. It's pretty simple. I do want to add too, if you have a high energy child, you can ask them to come to you, say, yes, mom, make eye contact, but also ask them to fold their hands. There is something about folding your hands that kind of captures the energy, and it just gives them something to do with their hands. So again, it's not when they're 16 would you have them do that, but when they're younger, that's just a tool to help them get control of themselves.
Excellent.
Okay? So in the beginning, because you're not sure if your kid is attentive yet to what you're saying, like a kid can sit and make eye contact, but maybe not even listen to you. I know I've done that to people. And so sometimes you may want to ask your child to repeat back what you said to them, or if they're very young, you may always require that. Also, if you have a child that's very forgetful and they are characterized by not completing exactly what you asked of them, and you're not sure if they really heard you in the first place, the best way to solve that is to, after they say, yes, mom, they make eye contact, you give instructions, then they start repeating back to you exactly what you told them to do. And that just confirms that they heard you. And then the last thing that they're going to do after you've given the instruction is they should say, yes, mom, always, after you've given any instruction.
So let's give this example of Emily, because we want to highlight something here. So
yes. So here,
this
we're
is
going to role
Mom,
play.
and I'm Emily.
Okay.
All right.
Emily,
Yes, Mom.
thank you for coming when I called you. And you remember to say, yes, Mom. Good job. I would like you to go get dressed for softball.
Yes, Mom. I'll get dressed.
There you go. That's an example. That's simple. But what's really important is I called Emily's name and I did not talk to her until she had come to me and she had said, yes, Mom, and made eye contact. Of course, Dave didn't do that, but you're going to see the Dela Cruz kids perform this.
Excellent.
They'll show that. So now on to step 3.
All right.
Want me to go? Or
Sure. No, go ahead.
Okay, step 3 is after our kids have received our instruction, they've acknowledged it and said, yes, Mom, or yes, Dad. Then our children need to go immediately and completely. And again, we're talking about training them here during your family time, whenever you're training them. You're going to have to define what that means, and you're going to define what it doesn't mean. So a lot of times when we tell our kids to go do something and they agree to go do it, maybe as they're walking back to their room, maybe you asked them to pick up their room, they're walking to their room and they see the dog, so they get down on the floor and they start playing with their dog. Well, that's not obeying, not at all. And even if they got up after a minute and went to their room and did exactly what you said, they didn't obey you right. And if you let those things slide, you accept that as obedience, then they'll do it whenever they want. And it becomes a habit for them that I don't have to obey immediately. As long as I obey eventually, my parents are okay with it. They don't do anything. I want to encourage you not to do that. It will just cause you might do it in the beginning, but you will realize it's going to cause you a lot of heartache later on. And especially when you have a teenager. You want them to understand, and we want them to understand biblically, that we obey immediately. We don't obey when we feel it. We don't obey just when basically when we feel it, or we see something. Yeah, when it fits into our life. And then lastly is you want to obey completely. It's really important that they don't do part of what we ask, but they actually do all of it. And I know some of this can seem, I don't know, to some of you it might seem silly or too high expectations, but you got to go back to what God expects of us.
Correct.
And our kids can obey us immediately, and they can obey us completely. Trust me, because it's worked for us.
Yeah. So hopefully you're starting to get the picture of What's the biblical principle and the biblical mandate? It's obedience as exhibited by Samuel. That's where we're trying to go. From that, we've talked about tools, right? Having your child come to you, put their hand on you, say, yes, mom, then you give instructions, they repeat instructions, they immediately do the instructions, right? This is the process. Now, it may look slightly different in your house. You have to figure out what God's put on your heart, but at the end of the day, you're trying to get obedience as reflected in Samuel. Now, this is very stringent, right? Which is why there is an appeal process. And that's something Gary covers very well in his class. So again, if you haven't watched that, please watch that video. We're not going to talk a lot about that except to say the following two things. One is the ability to make an appeal is an earned freedom. In other words, your child has to prove that they have the moral maturity to make appeals. If they're constantly appealing everything that you ask them to do, then they're demonstrating they don't have the moral maturity. Or if they're making an appeal for invalid reasons, they don't have the moral maturity. Yeah. This is something that they need to earn, okay? And then it can be granted, but it's a freedom that they can forfeit if they abuse it. And like Gary says, it's really important that when they make an appeal, it has to be because they're bringing new information that you didn't know. For example, I say, hey, Emily, do you mind starting to work on dinner? She's 19 years old now, right? So I'm a little more courteous rather than Emily, go work on dinner. But Emily might say, Dad, can I bring something to your attention? Or at this age, Dad, can I make an appeal? Sure. I am just about done with this homework, and I feel like if I can have 5 more minutes, I can knock it out, and then I won't lose my focus. Would you mind if I started dinner in 5 minutes? And I might say, absolutely, that's no problem at all, because I fully understand that mental process that she's talking about and the appeal that she's making. On the other hand, they're playing outside, and I say, hey guys, it's time to come start dinner. And they say, oh, we want to play for 5 more minutes. That's not an appeal. In fact, that might actually cause them to lose the freedom to make an appeal in the future. There was no new information. They didn't come to me respectfully and say, hey, we were almost done with this game, and we have 2 or 3 minutes left. Would you mind if we just finish this one? That didn't occur. So there's a fine line between what is an appeal, when is it appropriate, and when is that freedom lost. Yeah.
And I just want to point out the example Dave gave with Emily as a 19-year-old is not how you would do it with children in your home right now. Dave asked her a question, would you mind? We don't ask our kids those questions when they're younger at all, because it's very confusing. So if it's something where they really have a choice, that's fine. But when we're talking about learning, especially in the beginning stages of learning obedience, we're not giving them choices. We need them to cooperate and work as a team. So we need them to come and do something. We're not going to ask them. We're going to say, it's time. We might say, hey, in 5 minutes I'm going to call you, and then it's time to come inside. And then 5 minutes later we go out and we say, it's time to come inside. It's not we don't ask questions. So again, an older person, that's different. It's how we would treat one another, because we're all adults, but it's different when you have young kids. Or again, if you're a boss, it might be different. I wanted to give you an example here. Dave, can you read Emily? So I'll be mom.
Go ahead.
Emily.
Yes, Mom.
Please get the broom and sweep the floor.
Yes, Mom. May I ask you a question?
Yes.
May I vacuum the floor instead of sweeping? I prefer the vacuum.
Sure, I don't mind. Okay, so this is an example of Emily. I asked her to actually sweep the floor, but she had a different preference. She wanted to vacuum. Well, because I specifically said to sweep it with the broom, in order for Emily to be obeying me, she needs to do exactly what I say, and she needs to use the broom. It would not be obedient if she went and got the vacuum cleaner. And again, if we make exceptions on this, then it gets confusing when there is no exception. So we want to use these small times, these small training opportunities in our home to not allow exceptions and explain to them why, that for right now, we want them to come and make an appeal or come and ask us, hey, Mom, do you mind if I use the vacuum instead of the broom? Sure. I mean, I didn't care, but I wanted her to get in the habit of not leaning on her own wisdom and not assuming, what if I had a reason? Maybe the vacuum cleaner wasn't working well, and I didn't have time to, I don't need to explain everything to her. And maybe I didn't want her to use the vacuum. But if she leaned on her own wisdom or her own preference and went and got the vacuum cleaner and did the floor and actually made a bigger mess because the vacuum cleaner was broke, it would have been disappointing to me because she didn't follow my instructions. And the moral of it is I want her to come and ask. I want her to be humble. I don't want her to assume that because she wants to do it, it's what's best. So it's just teaching humility, even if it sounds simple. So when your kids do something different than what you ask of them, don't overlook it until they've earned that freedom. To make exceptions to what you're saying. And I think out of respect, we should always ask. If Dave asks me to do something and I want to change it, I always, out of respect for Dave, I go and ask him, hey, are you okay if I do it this way? And that's the same if I had a boss.
Absolutely.
So we want to teach our kids the same standard. But if you allow your kids to make exceptions because you're the parent and you don't care and you don't want to deal with it, you are going to create a problem the older and older they get.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to pause again and watch one of Jennifer's videos, and then we'll be right back to conclude this lesson in just a couple of minutes.
Hudson!
What do you want?
I need you to go sit and think about how you're supposed to respond when I call you.
Whatever.
Hudson!
Yes, Mommy?
Hey, bud, I need you to go ahead and clean your room, please.
Okay, yes, Mommy.
Nathaniel!
Yes, Mommy?
Hey, bud, where are you supposed to look when I talk to you?
At you?
All right, I want you to go back. We're going to try that again. Nathaniel!
Yes, Mommy?
Much better. I need you to please feed the cat for me.
Yes, Mommy.
Elizabeth!
Yes, Mommy?
Elizabeth, I need you to go sit and think about what you're supposed to do when you hear your name. Elizabeth!
Yes, Mommy, I'm coming.
Hey, sweetie, I need you to go potty and get your shoes on. We're getting ready to leave.
Yes, Mommy. I'll go potty and get my shoes on.
Good job. Thank you. Okay. Hudson!
Yes, Mommy?
Hey, bud, I need you to go ahead and clean your room, please.
Can I please make an appeal?
Yes.
Daddy asked me to go help him with the back. Can I please do that first?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, come to Mama. Come to Mama. Oh, no. This is good. Mama, come to Mama. Hey, Mommy said come to Mommy. Come to Mommy. Good girl, you came to Mommy. Good job. Abigail, come to Mommy. Come to Mommy. Yay! Good girl, you came to Mommy.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Again, thanks to Jennifer and her
Yes.
kids for putting that together. They're excellently done, and we really appreciate it.
Yep.
We just want to close with the following things. One, Gary talks about this, so I'm not going to go into it at all, other than just to remind you to mean what you say or don't say it at all.
Yeah.
Don't ask your kids to do something that you don't plan on enforcing.
Yeah.
It's better to not ask them to do it in the first place
Yeah.
than to undercut your own authority and to give them two different versions of obedience. The last point we want to discuss with you is how to correct at this stage in our class. We're going to get into much more layers of correction shortly, but for the purposes of this class and for the purposes of you guys implementing this in your home over the next few weeks, we just want to highlight this particular point.
Yeah. First of all, Jennifer already modeled this for us in the video earlier. She sent her son to go and try it again when he had the wrong attitude. After we teach the class on repentance, forgiveness, and restoration, like Dave said, we're going to go into detail about it's not good enough that they just go do it again. We got to go much deeper about why did they behave that way in the first place. But for now, we're not going to get into that. And I know that can get a little frustrating, but it's important that you first have the habit of these 3 steps in place, and that you guys are consistently doing them, and that your kids understand the expectation. And so right now, don't worry so much about their heart and why they're behaving or treating you a different way. We're just going to have the action, but then we're going to get to the heart. For now, just simply say to your child, I need you to go try again. I don't have the freedom to give you instructions right now. Why don't you tell me why? You can ask them questions. There's no one way to do it. But I know the older my kid is, obviously I want to ask them a lot of questions. So if I say, Emily, and she doesn't say, yes, Mom, she says, yeah, or what, I would just simply look at her and say, I need you to go try that again. I'll call your name again. I don't ever remind them. By the way, you don't need to remind them. Maybe a 3 to 5-year-old, you might still have to remind them. And you can remind them by asking them a question. Do you remember what to do when I say your name? But if you've got a 6-year-old and up, you don't need to say that anymore. You can simply look at them and say, you need to go try that again. And if they say, what? What do you mean? Why don't you go think about our devotional that we had earlier today? Because remember, you're hopefully going over this every day for a little bit of time. And you can just refer back to what you taught earlier. Do not reteach them. Because if you do, they will continue to expect you every single time to reteach it. They don't need to remember because you're going to tell them. So don't tell them anymore. 6 years and up, simply ask them, what did we discuss in our family devotional? And you're going to have to do it with a lot of self-control because you're probably going to get offended and angry, and that won't produce the righteousness that you want in your kids. So stay calm and expect it. This will happen. Let's say that your kid does come to you the right way. They do say, yes, Mom, but let's say they say it with an attitude like, oh, yes, Mom. Then you can say, is that how we practiced in our devotional? Is that how you want me to speak to you if you called me? Why don't you go back and try again? Or actually, I wouldn't even probably say it that nice. I'd just say, go back and try it again. So again, you know the standard now because you've defined it in your devotional time with them. It's so clear. And anything less than what you taught them now is subject for correction, and you simply are going to correct by making them do it again. If they will not repent or change right then you simply take away their freedom. You say, I need you to go sit. You're choosing to not do what we've trained you, so you're going to go sit for a while. And if it's a younger child, you can say, I'm going to set a timer and you're going to sit for 5 minutes. We don't call it grounding or timeouts. Mm-hmm. We don't use those terms, and we'll explain why when we get into correction. But for now, you can set a timer and just say, when the timer goes off, I'm going to come and see if you're ready to discuss with me how to obey the right way and ready to practice it. Because we can't force them. So we can let them go sit, but do not let them go do what they want. If they're not ready to do it the right way and you let them go off and watch TV or have fun, well, that's not a correction at all. That's basically saying to them, it's okay, you chose not to obey and I'm all right with that. We don't ever want to do that. So simply send them off. And if they start throwing a fit, just walk away and say, I don't have the freedom to talk to you right now. And when you calm down, I'll come back and talk to you. The most important thing is you do not forget that they have to go back and do it the right way.
Correct.
The first time that they messed up. Because they can start, adding a lot of sin. It can kind of snowball and get bigger and bigger and bigger, their attitude, because they just don't want to do what you're asking them to do. It's really important that you go all the way back to the very beginning where this all started and you tell them, are you ready to do it again the right way? And they'll learn really quick. Life is not going to go on for them, and life is not going to be fun if they don't do it the way your family's defined it. Be a team. Work together when you notice. Sometimes I'll compromise and Dave will notice it. Sometimes Dave might compromise. We respectfully point it out to each other. We don't take over for each other unless it got real bad. Dave, of course, can do that. But we pull each other aside and we'll talk about it. So be a team. Do not get mad at each other when one of you is better at this process than the other. I would say, because I trained the kids every day and Dave was traveling and gone a lot, I was much better at it. So it wasn't because I had a better heart than Dave. I practiced it more, so I was in a habit. And so when Dave would come home, I would remind him what we had been working on, and sometimes he wouldn't hold them to the standard. So I would pull him aside and remind him, hey, do you remember we talked about this, and this is the goal, and this is what we're doing? And then Dave would go back and apologize to the kids and do it right. So be a team, don't turn on each other. This kind of training can actually cause more conflict in your marriage because you get critical, and that's not going to produce God's plan. And please reach out to us if you're having a lot more conflict in your marriage. Reach out to people, get help, reach out to us. We certainly have been through that. The goal is not to make your marriage more difficult. It's to help you learn to work as a team.
And the one thing that I would want to add to what Tammy just said is that training your children is the responsibility of both parents.
Yeah.
Now, your dynamic may vary, right? I travel quite a bit. Tammy homeschools the girls, so there's a dynamic there where she does do more of the training, but that doesn't relieve me of my responsibility. It is not accurate that mom does the training and dad's the punisher. The truth is, you both need to be on the same page. You both need to be unified. You need to be having that time together each day in front of your children, and dad needs to be just as actively involved as mom.
Yeah. And again, being on the same page does not mean that you're both going to be doing what's right. That being on the same page is when Dave doesn't do it right, I go and I privately point it out to him. Because Dave and I, it's taken us years to get in habits of some of the things we're teaching you. And so, of course, we didn't do it right. Of course, we were on the same page, but yet in the moment, we messed up all the time. So being on the same page is not that your spouse did it right the first time. It's that your spouse, when you talked with them, they went back and did it right. Guys, you're going to mess up, and it's good for your kids to see that, because then they realize, oh, my parents are being trained too. They're learning. They're being expected by God to do the same thing I'm being expected to do to them. So we went back to our kids, hey, I'm so sorry. I was not holding you to the standard earlier today. I was tired or sick or frustrated, and I was letting you get away with not obeying the right way. Will you please forgive me? I need to obey God and call you to the same standard that I'm called to. So I just want to make sure when we say we're on the same page, that doesn't mean Dave and I are always doing it right. We're on the same page because we know the goal, but we both help each other to get back on track.
That's right. And then lastly, is just remember that you are the example.
Yep.
James chapter 1, 19 through 26 reminds us that we're the example of self-control and how to make it right when we mess up. When your children mess up, it does not justify unkind words or a rude tone with your children. You'll never be perfect, but always apologize and do it the right way immediately, just like you ask of them.
Yep.
Let's close with the following verse, and this is James 1, 19 through 26. It says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." Yeah.
So everything we've shared with you today, all the steps to teaching your kids how to obey, why it's important that they do it exactly as you say, that is what this scripture will come to life for them. If you read through that scripture again and you look through what you're training in the heart of your child by teaching them biblical first-time obedience, this is what they one day will transfer to God. They're going to learn to have self-control. They're going to learn to be quick to listen and slow to speak. They're going to learn that they should not forget what they read. They should, listen to the word. Well, you're teaching them to listen to you first. Remember, you're the first example of the standard in their life. So you're going to teach them to not merely listen to your words, but it says so that you deceive yourselves, but it says do what it says. So if you require in your home for your kids to listen to you and then do what you say exactly, then when they come to the Bible and they see, oh, that is exactly how God is, they'll be in that habit already. So it'll be much easier for them. It also says God wants us to have the discipline of character and the self-control to be able to look at His Word and not forget it when we leave. Same thing. We want our kids to hear our instructions and not forget it. That's a habit. That's a character trait. And it also says you want to go on and you want to obey it. And it says it will be a blessing to them, not only to others. So you're not just training obedience for your comfort and for your home to be great or for you to look good to other people. You're really doing it for such a deeper and bigger reason.
Absolutely.
It's for them to in turn obey God the same way.
Okay, so we're going to cut this video, but I do just want to say this in closing, that despite what's happening right now in this nation and all around the world, there is an opportunity that you have with your kids, probably more time with them than you may have had in years. And I really want to encourage you guys to teach obedience, teach biblical obedience. It's a mandate in the Scriptures. The tools you use to implement them, there's variety, and you certainly have freedom there, but you need to bring your children to the biblical standard, and now is a great time to do it. So